The news broke suddenly, interrupting what had been an ordinary morning. A quiet neighborhood known for its calm and routine was now at the center of a growing crisis. A woman had been reported missing, and within hours, authorities began to suspect that this was not a simple disappearance. It was something far more serious, something planned. Witnesses reported seeing a vehicle leaving the area late in the night, but no one paid attention at the time. It was only after investigators began piecing together the timeline that those small details started to matter. The victim, known for her consistent routine, had vanished without a trace, leaving behind personal belongings and unanswered questions. Police quickly secured the area, treating it as a potential crime scene. Officers moved carefully, documenting everything, while detectives began speaking with neighbors and gathering initial statements. Every second mattered. In cases like this, the first few hours often determine how much evidence can be preserved and how quickly answers can be found. As updates spread, the public became aware of the situation, and concern began to grow. People followed every detail, hoping for a breakthrough. If you're interested in stories like this and want to stay updated as events unfold, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. But while the investigation was just beginning, something unexpected had already happened. A small detail, something the kidnappers likely overlooked, was quietly sitting within the evidence. Investigators hadn't fully realized its importance yet, but when they did, it would change everything. Because in cases like this, it's often not the biggest mistake that exposes the truth, but the smallest one that no one thought would matter. As investigators continued working through the early stages of the case, their attention turned toward understanding the victim's life in detail. In situations like this, knowing a person's routine can often reveal where something went wrong. The victim was known for consistency. Her daily movements rarely changed, and she followed a predictable schedule that made her sudden disappearance even more alarming. Friends and family described her as responsible, cautious, and unlikely to put herself in risky situations. She maintained regular contact with those close to her, responding to messages and calls without delay. That pattern had been broken the night she vanished, and for investigators, that silence spoke volumes. It suggested that whatever had happened was sudden and not by choice. Detectives began reconstructing her final known movements, tracing her steps hour by hour. They reviewed phone activity, checked nearby surveillance cameras, and spoke to anyone who might have seen or heard something unusual. At first, nothing seemed out of place. Everything followed her normal routine, until it didn't. Then a detail emerged that caught their attention. A witness mentioned seeing a vehicle parked in an unusual position near the victim's home earlier than expected. It wasn't something that raised alarm at the time, but now, under investigation, it became significant. Detectives began working to identify the vehicle, knowing that even the smallest lead could break the case open. At the same time, investigators considered whether the victim had been specifically targeted or if this was a random act. Each possibility required a different approach, and both were taken seriously as the case developed. Public interest continued to grow as updates spread. If you're following this story and want to stay updated, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Because as investigators dug deeper, they were beginning to suspect that the kidnappers' mistake may have started even earlier than anyone first realized. As the investigation moved into a more focused phase, detectives began narrowing in on the critical window of time when the kidnapping likely occurred. Every detail from that night was re-examined, from the victim's last known movements to the smallest observations reported by neighbors. The timeline, once unclear, was slowly beginning to take shape. Investigators reviewed surveillance footage from nearby homes and streets, searching for anything that might have been missed during the initial sweep. Hours of recordings revealed mostly quiet scenes, empty roads, passing cars, and still surroundings. But then, within the time frame they were analyzing, something stood out. A vehicle appeared again, matching the description given earlier by a witness. This time, the footage showed more than just its presence. The vehicle slowed near the victim's home and remained there longer than expected. Its movement did not match normal traffic patterns, and that alone raised suspicion. Detectives began tracking its path, pulling footage from additional cameras to follow where it came from and where it went. At the same time, they examined the victim's phone activity. The last signal placed her inside or near her home, but shortly after, the data stopped. There were no calls, no messages, just silence. That sudden cutoff suggested a moment where everything changed. Piece by piece, the timeline was becoming clearer. Investigators now had a stronger sense of when the incident occurred and possibly how it unfolded. But more importantly, they began to realize that the individuals responsible may not have been as careful as they thought. As more details emerged, public attention continued to rise. If you're following this case and want to stay updated, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Because as detectives followed the path of that vehicle, they were about to uncover the first real mistake that could lead them directly to the kidnappers. As investigators followed the trail of the suspicious vehicle, the case began to shift from uncertainty to direction. What once seemed like scattered clues were now forming a pattern. Detectives expanded their search, pulling footage from traffic cameras, nearby businesses, and residential security systems to track the vehicle's movement beyond the neighborhood. Frame by frame, they reconstructed its path. The vehicle had not just passed through, it had stopped, waited, and then left at a time that aligned closely with the victim's disappearance. That alone was enough to raise serious concern, but it was what came next that truly stood out. At a nearby intersection, one of the cameras captured a clearer angle. For a brief moment, the license plate became partially visible. It wasn't enough to identify the vehicle immediately, but it provided something investigators hadn't had before, a starting point. Even a few numbers or letters could be enough to narrow down possibilities. Detectives began running combinations, cross-referencing vehicle registrations, and filtering results based on location and timing. It was a detailed and time-consuming process, but one that often leads to breakthroughs in cases like this. At the same time, forensic teams continued examining the area around the victim's home. Subtle signs began to emerge, disturbances that were not obvious at first glance, but suggested that something had occurred. These details supported the growing theory that the victim had been taken from that location. The pieces were starting to connect. The vehicle, the timing, and the physical evidence were all pointing in the same direction. As the case gained more attention, people followed every update closely. If you're interested in stories like this, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Because what investigators were about to discover next would confirm that the kidnappers had made a mistake, one that could soon expose everything. As investigators continued building their case, the focus shifted to analyzing the partial license plate captured on camera. Even though it was incomplete, it provided a crucial lead. Detectives began narrowing down possible matches, filtering vehicles by region, color, and time of movement. What seemed like a small detail was now becoming the center of the investigation. Hours turned into days as teams worked through databases, comparing records and eliminating possibilities. Then, a breakthrough came. One vehicle matched not only the partial plate but also the description given by witnesses and the movement pattern seen on surveillance footage. It wasn't a full confirmation yet, but it was enough to move forward. Authorities began digging deeper into the registered owner of the vehicle. Background checks, location history, and known associates were all examined. Investigators needed to understand whether this was a direct link to the crime or just a coincidence. As they gathered more information, connections began to form. connections that made the situation more serious than they initially thought. At the same time, forensic evidence collected near the victim's home was reanalyzed with this new lead in mind. Certain findings that once seemed unclear now started to make sense when aligned with the vehicle's presence. The timeline, the physical evidence, and the new suspect were all beginning to fit together. Detectives knew they were getting closer, but they also understood the importance of precision. Acting too quickly without full confirmation could risk the case. Every step had to be calculated and supported by solid evidence. Public interest continued to grow as more updates surfaced. If you're following this investigation and want to stay informed, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Because as investigators closed in on the vehicle's owner, they were about to uncover a connection that would take the case to an entirely new level. As investigators closed in on the owner of the vehicle, the case entered a decisive phase. Surveillance teams were assigned to monitor movements, while detectives worked quietly to gather enough evidence before making any direct approach. The goal was clear: build a case strong enough that nothing could be left to chance. The registered owner quickly became a person of interest, but investigators didn't stop there. They began mapping connections, identifying associates, and analyzing communication records. What they discovered suggested that this was not an isolated act. There were signs of coordination, indications that more than one person may have been involved. At the same time, digital evidence started to reveal even more. Phone data placed the suspect's device near the victim's location during the critical time frame. This detail aligned closely with the surveillance footage, strengthening the case significantly. It was no longer just about a suspicious vehicle. There was now a clear link between the suspect and the scene. Detectives also uncovered something unexpected. One of the individuals connected to the suspect had made a mistake, an action that unintentionally exposed part of their plan. Whether it was a message, a location trace, or a careless move, it gave investigators insight into how the crime may have been carried out. This discovery changed everything. What had been a slow and careful investigation was now gaining momentum. Authorities began preparing for the next step, knowing they were close to uncovering the full truth. As the story gained attention, more people followed each update closely. If you're interested in real investigative stories like this, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Because with the evidence now aligning and the suspects under watch, investigators were about to take action, one that could finally bring answers to a case that had started with a single, small mistake. As the investigation reached its most intense stage, authorities moved forward with a coordinated plan to act on the evidence they had gathered. Surveillance had confirmed consistent patterns, digital records had placed the suspects in key locations, and the connections between them were now clear. Investigators knew they had reached the moment where careful planning would turn into decisive action. Early in the morning, law enforcement teams executed multiple operations at once. Locations tied to the suspects were approached simultaneously to prevent any chance of escape or destruction of evidence. The element of surprise was critical. Officers moved in quickly, securing the areas and taking the individuals into custody without incident. Inside the locations, investigators began collecting additional evidence. Items were documented and removed for analysis, each one potentially adding another piece to the puzzle. At the same time, detectives conducted interviews, working to confirm what they already believed and to uncover any remaining details. Under pressure, inconsistencies began to surface, and the story the suspects had tried to maintain started to break apart. It became clear that the mistake made earlier in the case had set everything in motion. What the suspects thought was a small oversight had actually created a trail that investigators were able to follow step by step. That single error had ultimately led authorities directly to them. As news of the arrest spread, public attention intensified. Many who had followed the case from the beginning now saw a major breakthrough unfold. If you've been keeping up with this story, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel for more true crime content. Because while the suspects were now in custody, the case was not over yet. The final stage would reveal the full truth behind what really happened. As the case moved into its final stage, investigators worked to bring everything together, ensuring that every piece of evidence clearly supported what had been uncovered. The suspects were now in custody. But the process of proving the case in full detail was just as important as the arrests themselves. Detectives, forensic teams, and legal authorities collaborated closely, organizing the timeline, the physical evidence, and the digital records into a complete and undeniable narrative. What had started as a sudden disappearance had now been fully traced back to a carefully planned act that unraveled because of one critical mistake. That single oversight, something the kidnappers likely believed was insignificant, became the key that allowed investigators to follow the trail step by step. From surveillance footage to phone data, every detail connected, leaving little room for doubt. In court, the evidence spoke clearly. Each finding reinforced the next, creating a chain that led directly to the suspects. The case demonstrated how modern investigative techniques, combined with patience and precision, can uncover even the most carefully hidden plans. For many following the story, it was both shocking and revealing to see how quickly things changed once that first mistake was discovered. For the victim and their loved ones, this stage brought a sense of relief, knowing that those responsible were being held accountable. While the events could not be undone, justice provided a form of closure and a chance to begin healing. As the story reached its conclusion, it left behind an important reminder. No matter how carefully a crime is planned, even the smallest mistake can expose the truth. If you followed this story from beginning to end, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel for more gripping true crime stories. Because sometimes, it's not the biggest clue that solves a case, but the one that was never meant to be noticed.